What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist Astrology. Justin here, and are you ready to get into those lunar shenanigans? Because this one is a bit of a mixed bag this week, like normal. The moon starts off with some overall pretty nice conversations. It's a little tricky with where it starts off in its fall. Then there's this bit of tension when the moon enters into Sagittarius, and it kind of puts us in this sort of little tense pocket there for those couple of days. But then it kind of eases out there. But a lot of interesting thoughts, kind of things to kind of meditate on as we're kind of moving to this energy, as we're getting ready to close out this lunar month here and then move into a new lunar cycle as we get ready to start here. And we'll get into all that here in a moment. But if you're new here, again, my name is Justin, and one of the things that I do in this channel is talk about the lunar shenanigans, which talks about the astrology of the moon, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, what happens to go void of course, and just to get a general feel of the energies as the moon is having these different conversations with the different celestial bodies and how those energies are distributed with us, because the moon is such a great representation of the activity that is going on the earth, how that sun's light is reflected here. So really great when you think about that moon. But before we jump into this thing here, one other thing: if you want to support the work that I'm doing more than other than the way that you're doing right now, then I have a link down in the description box below with my Patreon, and on there I have a couple of tiers. One of them gives you access to the Lucky Day podcast, where I talk about the most auspicious days for each month for whatever endeavor that you're wanting to initiate. And then the second tier includes that plus a personalized transit report from me. The closest thing to get the next best thing to get a personal reading with me. Who doesn't want that? But that's something that's available for you as well. So definitely check that out. And if you have any questions, my email's down there as well. So definitely reach out. But let's go ahead and get into this thing here, because I'm going to be covering the week of November 18th through the 24th, 2025. With all these energies coming through here, we're channeling these cat vibes. We're going to take care of ourselves here. We're going there calm. But to start off there, and it's actually a fairly nice energy considering. On the 18th of November, that's going to be on a Tuesday, the moon's waning. We're wrapping up our time here in this lunar cycle, and it starts off with applying a conjunction with Venus. And if you're watching the video version, I have that conjunction up here, that chart. It's going to happen at 15 degrees, and come exact at 15 degrees and 22 minutes at about 8:49 p.m. Pacific time. And, I actually think about, when it's funny, we're talking about cats, I think about that kind of self-care nature of Venus, and even the nurturing qualities of the moon, because when we talk about the conjunction, that's where there's this fusion of energies that is happening. And this is a really nice fusion, when we're talking with the one that Venus is one of the benefic planets, and the Venus and the moon really, again, have that sort of nursing quality, that nurturing quality. So this can be a great one for just with the moon, being associated with the body, taking care of oneself, doing something where, maybe if you've been noticing a lot of maybe stress or maybe anxieties have been high, maybe making yourself some. I had some chamomile tea today. That was always lovely. It always brings the nerves down, so that could be something to do something nice for yourself. I got a haircut today. That could be another little thing. Do some kind of self-care thing. Even just the moon being associated with the house, doing some things around the home. Maybe there's some sprucing up that you want to do. Maybe you want to rearrange some things, get a new kind of energy sort of feel to the mix. Then there's some dusting that needs to get done. But just any of those sort of little things, showing that devotion to the things that your possessions, what that means, just the stuff that you have, but also I think this body, Venus is a very devoted, or deals with very ideas of the devotion and cleanliness, that purity. And so I think that when you're feeling that sense of that things are being taken care of, when things are clean, when things are in order, we move better, we operate better, we're able to navigate even feelings better, because this is a tricky place for the moon to be. It's got a lot of support with Big Papa and Venus here, but the moon's still kind of in its fall there. May have a little bit of troubles navigating those kind of waters of Scorpio sometime, considering that Scorpio is a martial ruled sign. They're the fixed water sign, or one of the nocturnal signs. And I think with the moon is used to moving, the fluctuation, and is not used to having that where the water stays stagnant, and having to be forceful with moving it. And so I think that even sometimes too, when we're thinking with Venus, this could be doing some things with Scorpio, doing some things that like help detox the body, even, doing something where maybe you go to take a bath and then, that sweat is kind of clearing out the pores. This could be any sort of things along those lines, maybe going for like a swim or something like that, if that's something that's available, or whatever that happens to look like. But I think that Moon Venus wants to feel things with just some laughter, some joy, and this could be maybe more, I'm getting more kind of an intimate feel with this, just one, because it's Scorpio, but I think also too, that with all these kind of celestial bodies here, because if you see, we got a lot of water energy with this moon, while the moon's in Scorpio right now. There's just water, and then this one little bit of fire that's going on here. But also we have all these planets that are under the beams of the sun. So there's a lot of like hidden things right now. And I think that this could be a great time to not necessarily go reclusive, but maybe to take a little more time for yourself, maybe to schedule some kind of like a more intimate time with maybe like family members, friends, things along those lines. Just something to think about as we're kind of navigating that space there. But then let's get into the next day, the 19th of November. This is going to be a Wednesday, because before the moon before we start that new lunar cycle, the moon first is going to form a trine with completed aspect with Big Papa, and that is actually going to happen pretty close together. It's going to both happen around about between 4:23 and 4:45 with both these trines that are happening. And the trines are when the celestial bodies are in 120 degrees, or like elements to one another there, as you see with all this water energy. And the trine is the most beneficial aspect. Now, with this coming from Jupiter, that is really nice. The only thing that's different with this one than these trines have normally been is that now Jupiter is retrograde. And when you think about just the planetary, when you think about the speed of the planet, the significators of Jupiter, being the other benefic, that sense of abundance, that relief from bonds, that sense of trust and faith and things and justice. Those energies are going to be, it's not that they're not coming, but they may be slower to materialize when we're thinking, because now Jupiter visually and kind of metaphorically there's moving backwards in the sky, as opposed to, with stronger when it's going direct, and it's things are going to be more readily available, more readily accessible there. And I think that with that moon and Jupiter, kind of trying Jupiter and Saturn, where, if we're going to have an aspect with the malefic, better it be a harmonious one than a hard aspect, which we'll find out in the next day. But that still doesn't diminish the fact that there's still going to be challenges that are going to come with the Saturnian thing. So this could be where maybe, we're working with, there are resources that are available with Jupiter, but in order to maybe access them, it's not necessarily Jupiter giving, but it's going to be from that discipline aspect of Saturn. Maybe we have to cut out some things. Saturn, it can be make us be kind of resourceful there, because I think about, a great example, like when I had quit smoking. That was one where not only was that great for my health, but I noticed that had freed up a lot of resources. And it wasn't that I was necessarily making more money. It's just that I freed up some of those expenditures and things. I was looking at my receipts, and seeing, thinking about moon things, and seeing how that changed how I can, where I can put my money, where I can get things flowing in a different type of way. So that might be something where that might be a space where we're navigating. Maybe we just have to look for alternative sources that weren't, that we didn't have to beforehand. Maybe there's something that we didn't need necessarily worry about before, but it's just like something new on the table. And again, just maybe having to make new connections and things like that. But really kind of reflect on how this lunar cycle's been. This has been a very active one, over this last month. And, just like based off the circumstances that are happening, how do you need to move forward? How do we all need to move forward? Because then we get to the new moon. And that's going to happen, it could come exact at about 10:47 p.m. Pacific time. And the new moon is just when the sun and the moon have their monthly conjunction. And now there's that kind of soul light of the mind is kind of fusing with the body, in a sense, on a personal level. But this could even be too on a broader level. The sun deals with the kind of like the authorities and kind of like kingships and things, and like that can be where the sun is that kind of the leaders, the moon represents the people. And so it could be, there's something here that's I think is kind of brewing here underneath the scenes of this conjunction. Because if you're watching the video for this, this new moon is happening. What makes this new moon is unique is that Mercury is actually retrograde in the mix. So we're about halfway through the Mercury retrograde cycle as we're getting ready to come through to this. So now that we're really kind of settled in, we've got about 10 more days of Mercury retrograde from Wednesday. How are we going to be moving forward into this new chapter? What are some things that maybe had showed up there, whether it had been on maybe a more personal level, maybe again something in the home, maybe this is something maybe as bigger as like maybe there have been major changes in your city, maybe there's been changes in your job, maybe there's been changes in travels, whatever that's looking like. But how are we starting this new chapter with this new set of information, with these new tools? This can be a great time to just get a bird's eye view of just like what's happened and what's to come. And one thing I wanted to mention kind of astronomically here that I'm still kind of working out is the moon is in its apogee, on the 19th, and that's when it's furthest away from the Earth. And I think that there's a need to just kind of take a step back and just kind of look at one's surroundings, just kind of look at some things and see, maybe, and I think that thinking about how with the sun, with all these planets being in the cazimi of the sun, this could be maybe where you're noticing some kind of like blind spots, maybe where you notice like, oh, this was maybe like, oh, I noticed like there's a little leak in my expenditures here where I've been maybe doing a little more impulse spending here, or maybe there's something going on in relationships that's needing to be adjusted here, or maybe something in your beliefs, maybe something in your friend groups, maybe something with relatives, family, with something with kids. So yeah, just some interesting things I think as we get ready to begin this new lunar cycle here. And it gets tricky, because then we get to Thursday, which is the 20th of November, and starting off, the moon enters into Sagittarius at about 2:25 a.m. Pacific time. Now the moon in Sag in itself, Sag is ruled by Big Papa, so that's cool. And it is the mutable fire sign as one of the diurnal signs, so it's an active energy. And I think the moon in Sag can be a very invigorating one. I'm just talking in general. Sag is one. There's that Jupiter promises that idea of something bigger, something brighter, something better, more. And I think that it brings that sense of enthusiasm, that sense of faith, that sense of, that trust in that energy, and that I think that really fuels the Sagittarian energy. And so I think this can be a very invigorating moon normally when we're working with that. The nice thing about that too is that even though Jupiter, they're not in aspect, by as far as like one of the major aspects, but Jupiter and the moon are in each other's domiciles, with the moon being in Sag and then Jupiter being in Cancer. So there's at least loose kind of reception there that is helping an otherwise pretty challenged moon, because now that the moon moves into Sag, now it's not being witnessed by the benefics. There's no support from Venus, and there's Jupiter, other than that reception, Jupiter's not applying any sort of thing. And this is why it's important to pay attention when there are different planetary ingresses into new signs, because then you want to get a lay of like what's going to be activated. Because as we can see here, the moon's going to be having some pretty tense conversations. One's going to be with Mars, and the other one's going to be with Saturn. Let's go ahead and talk about Mars, since there's no need to build it up. Because on the 21st of November, that's going to be on a Friday, the moon forms that conjunction with Mars at about 3:12 a.m. Pacific time. That's when it comes exact. But again, there's the moon is now being fused with that martial energy. And in Sag, it's a bit hotter, it's a bit bigger, and it's a bit more prone to be, Mars and Sag is the one. And I think that is on a less constructive level to be mindful of. This could be doing things impulsively. Mars can be the removal of good things, that takes away from stuff. This could be where you have this reactive, we get into big responses to Sag, and it's just really or can be really damaging really fast, so that would be, be mindful of just like if you notice any sort of like heat building up in the body, finding ways to release that. Maybe going for a run, maybe it's going to like, going getting like a punching bag, or going to like a gym, maybe it's taking a cool shower, whatever that may be looking like. But there's a frustration sometimes when I think with the moon Mars. This could be something where like, something around the home, with like has like some kind of issues there, or maybe happen to misplace some sort of thing, or something just gets damaged, when we're thinking with just Mars in general there. And this is, Mars again is kind of an inflammatory energy, so I would pay attention to, you again, even like things, it's like I get like the idea of like kind of like rashes and things like that, and maybe even making sure to just like hydrate and things along those lines can be very important, kind of like just things while the moon is forming that conjunction with Mars. But on a more constructive level, this can be a more enlivening energy. I think Mars can spur things into action. You may notice there's a bit more busyness, maybe in your travels, maybe in a bit more just around your city, around your home space, whatever that might look like. And that's something too I would pay attention if you are traveling. Just be mindful of just like, especially by like car and things like that, kind of road rage and getting, just things along those lines. Just kind of just pay attention there, but just maybe just more activity, just kind of in general there. So yeah, just kind of tune into how those changes happen. And this would be one where if you have a lot of mutable placements, that's going to be Sag, Pisces, Gemini, or Virgo. This one may be working more personally with you, so just something to keep in mind of as well. I think that's all I have to say about Mars. So let's go ahead and talk to Saturn. Let's finish this one up, because on the 22nd of November, before the moon enters into Capricorn, is going to form that square with Saturn retrograde. And again, this is another hard aspect, like at least with that conjunction was with one of the malefics that made that more harder than it would be conjunction with like Venus or Jupiter. But when we're talking about the squares, that's when the celestial bodies are 90 degrees apart from one another. And again, there's this tension, there's this it's an inharmonious sort of feel when we're working with the squares. And that could be maybe feeling enlivening. Look at that, the sun just entered into Sagittarius not too long ago. So it's like there's this invigorating feeling, maybe like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make this change. I'm going to start doing that workout. I'm going to start saving my money. I'm going to start planning for this trip. I'm going to start doing this thing. I'm going to start, maybe make this move. But then Saturn's just like, okay, that's cool. But, there's still like a whole bunch of work with that. Like, or it could be where, you have these plans, but then something gets in the way. Let's say like if we're working with like the body is just a good example. You get on a good kick, you're feeling motivated, you did that first day and it's like, yeah, I ran like a mile, that felt great. And then something in life happens, there's some sort of disturbance, and then you're just like, oh, well, maybe I'll just skip today. And then there's that sluggishness, that laziness that kicks in of Saturn. Then, next thing you know, a week passes by, a month passes by, and like, oh, let's just try with this new lunar cycle again. It creates this inconsistency. I think sometimes it can demotivate. I think when we're really thinking about a moon square square Saturn, and even though it's not applying to Mars anymore, there's still that separation. And I think of when you're kind of tucked away between hard aspects with the malefics like this, it can be like having a fever, where Mars is that extreme end of too hot, and then Saturn's that end of the chills and being too cold and not being able to find that moderation. And so that would be like figuring out how to stay moderate, and regulated in these next couple of days. I could see that where maybe some tensions could fly high and things like that. So that's just something to just kind of tune into, see what happens maybe around just kind of collectively and things like that. But then the moon, after going through that mess, then the moon moves into Capricorn, and that's going to happen at about 2:52 p.m. Pacific time. Now, we're still under the rulership of Saturn with the moon in Capricorn, and Capricorn's a cardinal earth sign. Cardinal earth sign, and they're one of the nocturnal signs. So again, receptive in nature. And I find that a moon in Capricorn, even though this is where the moon finds itself in its detriment, so that just means it's farthest away from its home sign of Cancer. It feels like it's almost like in its exile in a sense. And this could be where I think a good way of working with the moon in Capricorn is really one, just getting into the material, especially when we're just working with Earth moons. Looking at, I think, for example, the things that you're investing you're in. I think that Capricorn, especially with Saturn, can bring about that sense of discipline. Where are our resources going? How are the things that I have, those kind of moon things, how are they supporting me on a day to day? What does that look like? How have I been tending to my responsibilities, to my stuff, to the body, to my relationships, all of those tangible things. I think about with Capricorn there, and thinking about those, just kind of getting some game plans, especially maybe if there's an area that has been maybe particularly changed. And let me actually move on to this next slide here, because when we get into Sunday, we're still just pretty deep. We're steeped like in the middle of that moon in Capricorn there, and things kind of lighten up a little bit now, and that's something to pay attention to. Another thing, if you have any placements around the cardinal signs, that's Capricorn, Aries, Libra, and Cancer, those may be working more personally with you. But now the lay of the land is a little bit easier than the moon was in just a little bit ago, because now the benefics are witnessing the moon again, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. But as you see, as it's building up there, we got Venus coming up, we got aspect with Big Papa coming up, and even we're still talking with Saturn. Mars is just out of the picture for a bit, which love that. And then we got Saturn, who's still in the mix, but at least again it's an easier kind of conversation. So that at least you can kind of get a feel for now we're the pressure's coming off, at least for a little bit. Where we're shifting again. The moon is fluctuating again. But I find that is just a great time for, I think like a moon in Capricorn could be like, frugality, thinking about how you can make a little go a long way, whatever aspect that looks like. But yeah, it's, I think, a great energy to just, look at the, in Cancer, where we're feeling things are a little more subjective, but again, this allows us to kind of get outside of ourselves a little bit, kind of see things, see how the outer is reflecting the inner, in a sense, and what are some things that we maybe need to get in order with the moon in Capricorn. Because I think I think order is another really great kind of Capricornian word, that I think kind of embodies that very well. But then we get into this kind of last day here on Monday, the 24th of November. And this is a kind of a busier day. As you saw, the moon was building up a lot of conversations here, because we got a lot of planets hovering around these kind of in degrees of these signs. And the moon's first going to start with a sextile with Venus. And so this is an opportunity where, we may be, let's say, for example, if you've had to maybe cut out some things, maybe be a little more restricted with your resources. Again, it's I don't think that discipline has to be just punishing. I think that where, for example, when we're talking about, say, just an easy one's just working out with the body. I think that, maybe you're starting a new kind of health routine, kind of take care of yourself. Working out's grueling. It can be kind of tough. It can be sort of things, finding that motivation. But then it's like, what? Maybe afterwards you've prepared yourself, like you got a snack that you cooked up that, you're going to get your Venus on and, cook up some things in a really kind of nice, kind of hearty meal, or whatever that might look like, just for example. Or maybe, you got this new routine that you're going to do, so maybe you got some equipment for it. You got real excited, maybe you got some exercise band, maybe got some weights, maybe just got a new workout suit. You know what I mean. But I do think that this one is, I think too, I think sometimes when we think about Venus, it has to be extravagant. And sometimes a little, again, with Capricorn, a little can go a long way. And just finding these little moments of pleasure. I've been making more time to do some reading, and I've been reading more kind of astrology books. I've been getting more into reading Valence work and getting into Firmicus and things like that. But it's something that long term is going to help me, improve my craft and things like that. But it's also just I just enjoy reading, and that's, I think, kind of ties nicely with that moon sextiling Venus and Mercury, because something to kind of bring your attention to as well. Mercury and Venus are actually getting ready to form a conjunction. They're about 6 minutes apart from here. So what I like about this is like we're literally thinking about doing some, what are some ways that I can maybe bring some more Venus into my life? Maybe like if we're hanging out with friends, for example, maybe if you're used to just like going out, maybe we could just have like a little game night. We can do something together. We can cook together, whatever that looks like. I still think like being frugal and things like that doesn't have to be, again, something that's like super punishing. You can find those kind of appreciations for those small moments and can make those kind of long-term things. And it just creates a different sense of, I think, appreciation in things. And that's what I think is happening with that moon being opposite to Jupiter retrograde, where, again, the moon's kind of looking at Big Papa like, yo, what happened? Like, the fossil was always just used to just running. But now it's like it's turned down a little bit, and it's just like, oh, you kind of got to build this up and make that last till next week. And so I think with the moon opposite Jupiter, there can be this sometimes maybe this challenge of faith even. These like maybe a challenge to like our beliefs, thinking that like, oh, maybe this is, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it could be the sense of like, oh, what's the point of all of this? But I think that Jupiter is always keeping the bigger picture in mind. It's thinking about that, I just have to believe that if I keep doing these things that are trying to improve myself and make the most of what I can with the tools that are allotted to me at this moment, it's not to say that there aren't challenging things happening. Because, I think even when we're talking about like just to kind of couple those two together, the moon opposing Jupiter and sextiling Saturn, even when you have an easy aspect with the malefic, again, it's still a malefic. And it's like, even like if, let's say Saturn, you do that discipline, you get a bunch of land and things like that. That's just half the gift. Saturn's like, okay, you got that prize, but now you have to take care of it. You have to take care of it because it's like, otherwise, like if you just stop, then it's gonna stop. And so that's, and I think I can go ahead and switch back over. But yeah, I think that this just kind of wrapping up this week, I think that there may be challenges as far as like thinking like maybe adjusting to a new way of abundance. Maybe that relationship with like the gifts of Jupiter is different. But it's not that, I think again that the benefics aren't giving, but it's just like that, again, it maybe takes a little bit longer for those things to kind of show up there. And again, it's like maybe looking at other avenues of resources instead of, we may have been used to dipping, getting our resources from, maybe one, as a metaphor here, I'm just thinking about like a huge pond where maybe we have to, we probably shouldn't do that, but it would be instead having to go to maybe a couple of different rivers, maybe they may be like in like opposite areas of our location there. Or, I'll give you another example. This could be like, let's say if you've had to adjust maybe, well, I'm just thinking with just like groceries, for example, maybe exploring like not even just like exploring different like food banks, maybe thinking if you could like grow your own sort of like herbs, for example, maybe you're just like, you save where you can, like you're growing garlic, that's really easy. Garlic, those little things like that, trying to mitigate those sort of things. And it's just like, oh, I didn't expect to, have to go to these means to get the abundance that I'm used to, but it's cool to see that, like, okay, like, with a little time, like, oh, look at that, like, these things are growing. Like, if you leave, sometimes you just leave garlic, it'll just start growing by itself. So, but that's just like a rough kind of metaphor there, but because there are a lot of things, that are happening. There are a lot of adjustments that I think that we're making, as a collective. And I think that it's, when we're aware of those things, when we're aware of how we're moving, and we just kind of work together through this as we can, it just makes it just a little bit easier, and I think that there can be this sense of, even when there's things are moving around, you could feel that you've mitigated as much as you can. We can't necessarily control all the things around us, but we can try to control it as much as we can within our sphere. So, but yeah, that's basically the energies of this week. There again, a very kind of interesting one. I think we're getting into, there's this neat little pocket that's happening here, this stellium that's going on with all these planets, and yeah, we gotta Yeah, we gotta. Yeah, I think these next couple months are gonna be ones to watch for sure. But we'll navigate this a week at a time. But if you like that, if anything resonated with you, give it a thumbs up down in the. You will give it a thumbs up, and then comment also as well as far as how this has been navigating or how you've been navigating this week. I'll say personally, like I said, I've been kind of keeping an eye out for some things that new moon that's going to be happening again. Mercury, Sun, and Moon are Mercury, Sun, and Moon are going to be all square in my Venus placement. So that seems like something is going to be happening. Especially again, I have a Leo rising, so I'm expecting something around the home space. Maybe something it's Venus, so something in relationships. I don't necessarily expect something negative, but maybe just kind of like looking over some things in like the home or whatever that might look like there. Just thinking, just like, and those can be some ways that you can just kind of approach that. You can see what house that's transiting in, what it's activating, and what that house rules. Or like what that planet rules. So Venus rules my career house and then my third house. So this could be where I'm taking the things that I've learned and then, applying it to my career in some sense. It's changing up. And it is kind of changing up my communication style a little bit. But, maybe I take on a new, get up a new course or something like that. Or maybe finish up a course or something like that. And now it's like taking that new information and evolving my techniques and growing things. And, those could be just some ways to just like how you can work with those on a more personal level. When I say, when we're talking about that, get eyes on some dates and things like that. So... But if that's something where if you want to help kind of navigating that personally, seeing how either these transits are showing up or whatever that's looking at, getting to know your natal chart even more personally there, get down in the description box. There is a link to book a consultation with me. So definitely check that out. My email's down there if you have any questions. And if you want to just get a general feel of the energies for each month, there's a link or there's a playlist for Celestial News Monthly, which goes over where the sun and the other classical planets are doing, because I just focus on the moon, on the lunar shenanigans. But it talks about what signs they're transiting through, what signs are going to be most affected, and how to most practically work with those energies there. And then I also have this series of videos that talk about different different celestial bodies in different zodiac signs in different houses, and what are some ways to think about those placements as you're kind of working with this and thinking about how those themes have showed up in your life. So another thing for you to avail yourself of. So that's all I got for you there. So until next time, stay mindful out there. Well, once the moon moves out of under the beams of the sun, you keep eyes on that moon. When the sun's rising, know that the moon's not too far away from it. And I will catch you on the next one. Later.